genuinely screamed at, it would just be the norm. And I remember thinking in that time that I'm too fat. You weren't allowed to stop. If you stopped, I was almost brainwashed by them. You are literally young children and you're being told this. Genuinely, I mean blisters. You couldn't breathe, hold us down, kneel on us. That's you being weak, that's you being pathetic. Wow, we didn't think anything was wrong with that. Watch this. New lighting! In comparison to my other ones, sorry. Welcome back to my channel, everybody. I decided to do a serious video today just because I think that some things don't get enough recognition as they should and need for change to happen. So I thought I would just speak out about my story. Recently people have been speaking out about this on social media, but I'll get into that later. And I think it is so important that people are speaking out and they're sharing their stories, because it's kind of, we're all coming to the realisation together, which is nice but not nice at the same time, because, you know, I feel like a part of us was blinded by it, and that's kind of scary to think that we didn't even realise. So yeah, I've been reading up about other people's experience, this camera is gonna fall, experiences to do with this topic, and it kind of put things in perspective for me a little bit more, and I feel like it has with other people as well. I think it's inspired me a lot to make this video, because again, it just needs to be spoken about. I'm gonna start the story. It's a story time, but also just kind of like a little bit of a rant, because I feel like that's the only way that things are gonna change, sort of. A lot of people don't realise, because they haven't been in the situation or had that experience in their life. You know, with anything, like, just because you haven't experienced it doesn't mean you shouldn't listen and understand. Change only comes when people listen. So gymnastics was my passion when I was younger. I loved it up until, you know, I was in secondary school. I did it for years and years before I turned to cheerleading, which I did for a few years afterwards. I'll get into that, why I changed. I was in teams that competed. I worked my way up in the grades, and I was in, you know, I was in quite a few teams. I'm not saying I'm amazing at gymnastics. In no way was I an Olympic athlete, so I probably haven't had an experience in comparison to people who competed at higher levels, but this doesn't mean that I shouldn't be speaking out. I experienced this. I have a story, so I'm gonna say it. Just because somebody drowned in water 6,000 feet high doesn't mean the person that drowned in water, what is the saying? You know what I mean. Just because somebody's problem's worse doesn't mean it's not a problem. I don't know. Yeah, I was surrounded in that sort of environment for so long, I feel like I can speak out about it because I know enough about it and I've experienced it myself. There's a lot of things that people don't know about gymnastics, things that go on behind closed doors that you wouldn't necessarily think, and I'm sure many gymnasts or athletes can relate to this. And after watching Athlete A on Netflix, I have kind of come to the realisation that this was not okay. There's some things that need to be spoken about. I was forced to believe that I was never going to be a gymnast. No, I was too tall, I was too weak, just in general I wasn't good enough. And this can have an extreme effect on your mental state when you've been in that kind of mindset and you've been in that environment for so long. You're kind of said to be, and you start believing that you're not good enough for it, and you've worked so hard to try and get to a goal and you've not got there. I feel like a lot of this was shown through frustration in coaches. So I'm not talking about cheerleading at the moment, I'm talking about purely gymnastics. Coaches would have frustration, like real deep frustration with their gymnasts, and me included, and this was through mental and physical bullying. I'm just gonna get into the real deep stuff that people are probably thinking, like, why is she talking about this? Kind of the physical aspects that I think are not okay, but it was like the normal at the time. You don't actually realise when you're in it that there's anything wrong with these things. Like you're literally, that's just your environment. You're surrounded with it, you've been surrounded with it for so long, you know, from literally when I started up until secondary school, like that was just everything I knew. Gymnasts were always forced into positions. If we were in physical pain, we would be forced into that position no matter what. So I'm talking, you've got two blocks here, you're in the splits across them both, you are crying, you are in such agony, and they are pushing you down. You're going home crying. You know, if a session didn't make you cry, it almost wasn't a session. Everybody would be crying at some point. And the thought of that is actually a bit like, why didn't I think anything more of that, you know? We were forced into situations that were extremely nerve-wracking. There would be no sort of like emotional support. We would be forced into these things, forced into positions. Often I felt like a Barbie doll, like they were just like, when kids put the legs like this, that's almost what I felt like was happening. You know, we were just the toys that they were trying to mould into professional athletes, and that is kind of scary when you think about it. At my gym there was coaches that used to bully their gymnasts. I would witness this, and well, a lot of people would witness this. I've been in contact with Lizzie, who you all probably know. She used to do YouTube, who used to be in my team for a long time actually. We've experienced this together, so we've been talking about it recently, and it's kind of helped me understand and help her understand better, because, you know, we can kind of relive it together, if that makes sense. We have witnessed various bullying of coaches treating their gymnasts really badly. At one point I was lucky to have probably one of the nicest coaches in the gym, but you know, the thought that at any point I could be put into a different team, if I wasn't good enough for that team anymore, they could put me down or they could knock me up, and the thought of that really terrified me, because there'd be various times where they would move us up or down in a group depending on how our ability has fluctuated, and you just fear getting put in a group with a certain coach that you had heard or seen, you know, doing these things. So they'd be screaming at their gymnasts, they'd be body shaming their gymnasts, forced into certain diet plans, and often physically abusing them. So like really grabbing them, holding them down, putting them through physical and mental pain. And this was just terrifying to know that you could be put in that group and that coach would literally be in control of you. Because at the time it was honestly genuinely scary. Like, the coaches were scary. You would be scared to go to gymnastics because you didn't know what kind of mood the coach was in, if they would take it out on you that day. There was always like, they had a favourite, and if you weren't that favourite, you were gonna have a hard time. I always felt sick at gymnastics because I was so anxious inside. And then relieved when the session was over. I was always relieved. And I'm not saying that I had a bad experience with gymnastics the whole time. I'm just talking about certain times and certain things I've witnessed and experienced. You know, I'm not saying the whole experience was bad. I did enjoy it and it was something I was passionate about, but I didn't realise sort of the toxicity. I can't say the word. I didn't realise the toxic side of it, and sometimes how brutal it actually was. So for example, we would be forced into doing this. Right, there was a fat field. Often if it was a sunny day, we would just know that we were going to be going outside. For warm-up, we would literally run laps of this huge field. People would have asthma, and kind of like, there would be some people at a disadvantage for whatever reason, health reasons, whatever, and you know, nobody would be treated differently. If you had asthma, you were still running that field, you weren't allowed to stop. If you stopped, they would force you to do extra, so it would either be an extra lap or it would be an extra 20 press-ups now, 20 sit-ups, 20 burpees. Like, it would be constant, and if you were last as well, you could not be last. If you were last, when you stopped, you would probably have to do a whole conditioning routine. If you couldn't breathe because you were that worn out from the constant, you know, they would not care. They would not care. You know, that's you being weak, that's you being pathetic. That is, and they would tell you that. They wouldn't just think it, they would make it clear that you were weak. And you know, that does have an effect on your mental state, you know, when you're so anxious, and then if you do come last, or you're out of breath and you can't breathe, or you struggle with asthma, or then you're just not good enough. You just don't deserve to be on this team. They would often threaten you with, we're going to move you down a team, you're not good enough for this team. Like that sort of kind of mental, like, you're not good enough. And a lot of the time they would body shame us as well. Always suck in. It was that sort of atmosphere. If you had a chocolate bar in your snack, you know, you'd be getting devil stares. Like, it literally, we were kids. I'm talking young, like young. And they would be weighing us. They'd be comparing us. They'd be, you know, they'd physically press your stomach in if it wasn't sucked in enough. And, you know, sometimes you're bloated. Sometimes you've had a lot to drink that day. You're kids, like, you're not gonna be, you know, we're not models, and they're poking us, suck in, and you'd be sucking in. They'd prod you until you were sucked in enough, and you'd have to hold it there. It's actually crazy. They'd push you into the splits constantly, right, I'm not a flexible person, so gymnastics made me into a flexible person, and when I say they would be pressing down, if you weren't in the splits, everyone else would have to stay in the splits until you were, and that is actually physically painful, let me tell you. It is painful, especially when you're, you know, you're raised up and your legs are literally bending the opposite way. They would be pressing you down until you were at least on the floor, and then they would hold you down there. You would be crying, they wouldn't care. Often people would literally scream out, like in pain, would not care. They would not care one bit. It's almost torture. That was kind of their hardcore training technique, which is actually a little bit messed up when you think about it. Like, they were literally forcing little girls or little boys, whatever, into these positions that they physically could not go into. My body now is damaged from gymnastics. I even said this to the physio, and they said, were you a gymnast? And I was like, yeah. And they say, yeah, I can tell, because you're constantly clicking, you're extremely flexible in ways that are not meant to bend. Our bodies are fragile, especially when they're growing, and we're being forced into these, you know, like, you constantly hear gymnasts that got injuries, like, and endless injuries, and I'm not surprised. I'm genuinely not surprised. You'd be forced into doing more if you physically weren't capable. So say if you couldn't reach that target, or that you couldn't finish that conditioning move, or you'd be constantly forced into doing more and more and more and more, and if you couldn't do it, they'd up it harder, not kind of understand. There would be no sort of understanding, you know. They would constantly up it, and if you weren't strong enough, or if you were too weak that day, they would make it worse. They'd almost force you to be strong enough. So after I watched the documentary, I've realised how much it actually could be classed as physical and mental abuse. Like, it's not okay, especially for like young children. We're talking young, and it's just the normal to them. Like, they don't see. I've only realised now I'm kind of out of it, and I can see the bigger picture of what was going on, you know. I feel like when you're in it, you're so young and vulnerable. That has a mental effect on you outside of gymnastics as well. You know, it's not just when you're training, you carry that with you. When they're judging your body and they're body shaming, it does have an effect. Like, I have so many photos that I've looked back on, and I'm stood in the mirror, I'm sucking in, and I'm taking a picture, and I remember thinking in that time, like, I'm too fat, like, I'm literally stick thin, comparing my body and like doing videos of me just sucking in and out. And that is actually, I was almost brainwashed by them. They would not be afraid to scream at you if you were doing something and it wasn't good enough for their standards or the group standards. You would feel like the worst. You'd feel like you wouldn't deserve your position to even be there. They would, you know, you're paying a lot of money to be there. They'd make you feel like you don't deserve this place, and that would be very apparent to everyone in the group as well. And that's sort of bullying. You were constantly scrutinised against the others. Coaches would always have a favourite, and I was never the favourite. I wasn't as good as the other girls. I could just tell I wasn't the favourite. If you were injured as well, what is an injury? Like, they did not care if you had an injury. You were carrying on. And I remember I would be punished through various things. Lizzie actually told me, I remember when I did a double front and I ended up kneeing myself in the eye, and I was sent home with potential concussion. I had a black eye and a lump the size of a golf ball on my forehead. The week after I came back, the coach was like, do the double front. And when I cried, because obviously it's a traumatic thing when that's happened and they're implying you have to do it again. Yeah, she cried because she was terrified. Because I was injured just a week earlier. It still wasn't even healed. They made the whole group do conditioning, including me, and told me to stop being a chicken. It winds me up, and I think I actually remember that. She is physically injured and you're making her and the whole group, you know, and it wouldn't just be 3 burpees, it would be like 30 burpees, off you go. And so they'd lay you out if you all didn't do it. So if one person stopped doing it, everyone start again. Isabel's messed up. That constant, like, they're making it obvious that it's you that's the issue. When everyone's done at the end, everyone's annoyed at you because you made them do extra. You were the issue. You were always scrutinised if you messed up, you know? How are you meant to grow in that sort of environment? Like, mentally and physically, how are you meant to grow? You'd end up working your way up to the higher groups, and if your ability was not as good as them, you'd be, you know, the person everyone looks down on. It was made very obvious who that person was. The person who was not at greater ability was always treated differently to those that had better ability. When you needed help and they were supporting you, so supporting I mean as in, you know, physically helping you do doing a exercise, they would be very quick to tell you, you know, "Oh, you're heavy," or "Oh, like, you know, it would be made so obvious. You're little kids, you are literally young children, and you're being told this. And genuinely it has impacted me in later life, because I'm not gonna lie, I was very concerned about my weight. Obviously the anxiety, that made it 10 times worse, but I was very concerned about sort of my weight, how I just looked in general, and I feel like that did stem from the environment that I was in during my gymnastics stage. I'd be going home from gymnastics thinking that I was fat. Almost felt like they would choose the girl that had the issues that day to, for example, what Lizzie said, they would choose you because they knew that it was going to put the group through a harder time, if that makes sense. So they would choose the most vulnerable or the injured one or somebody who was struggling, and they would pick up on that, and then they would be like, right, almost use you as blackmail for the rest of the group. If anyone messes up right now, you will all be scrutinised for it. Sort of how it planned out. We'd all be breathless doing this conditioning routine, and often we'd be in a circuit sort of situation, and if that person messed up, everyone, circuits were the worst, everyone would have to do it. It would just create awkward tension in the group because that one person would have messed up for everyone. It was almost like, yes, you were in a team situation, but it's very unfair to scrutinise everyone because of an injured person. They're not able, like physically able to do the exercise or, you know, the routine or the move, the stunt, whatever. Wow, we didn't think anything was wrong with that. But yeah, so the awkward tension in the group, because everyone would be in pain, not just that person anymore, it would be everyone, because everyone had to do like so many more exercises than they would have if, you know, someone didn't mess up or someone wasn't injured. Just the comments looking back on our bodies, like, it was just so strict and noticeable if they thought we were a bit over, or if they thought they want, you know, they would almost pick little bits. They had the power to force us into things, you know, they were in control. We're little girls, they are the person we look up to. Even if that would hurt us mentally or physically, they had the power to literally treat us like Barbie dolls. Our feelings weren't considered. Our excuses would be irrelevant. You know, I can't breathe, I'm in pain. Stop often would be something people would say, or I would say, because genuinely I would be in pain. I can't walk on my ankle, please can I just have a rest for 5 minutes? No, none of that. There would be none of that. No empathy towards us. Well, I just remember often kind of resenting some of the coaches and just having that kind of, why are they picking at me? And I know a lot of people thought this, why have they got it out for me? If they were having a bad day, I remember this one time my coach had broken up with her boyfriend or something, and for some reason we all knew, and she was horrible that day. You know, if there was something going on in her personal life that kind of was outside of gymnastics, their sort of feelings would be projected onto us. It would always be taken out on us. Our hands would often be blistering and we would still be forced to get on those bars. Genuinely, I mean blisters all up here, and there would be no excuse. Whether that be us being held down, when they would actually physically kneel on us, like, so for example, I'm stretched out in a front splits and they would literally sit on us, genuinely sit on us, hold us down, kneel on us, dig their knees into us, like literally be sat on us, and that was the norm. Nobody would even second guess it. Parents would often have something to say, but other than that, gymnasts, coaches, all the other coaches, it was just the norm. If you saw someone getting screamed at across the room, genuinely screamed at, it would just be the norm. Nobody would even second guess it. Like, sometimes I genuinely thought I was going to be sick because I was that scared of doing things that I knew I couldn't do. Like, they would literally force you into doing things that are dangerous, but you felt like you couldn't, and they would be like, yes you can, yes you can. And yeah, you might be thinking, yeah, that's encouraging, but when it's something physical that you haven't been taught or haven't learnt yet, or you're not comfortable with, you're on a beam and you're being asked to do certain things, sometimes you can't, and they would not let you get off until you did it. There would be no questions about it, you would just have to do it. The mentality that just, if we weren't crying, literally it wasn't a proper session, that's the mindset that they fed us. Often I wouldn't even want to go. They literally had the power to hurt us. Yeah, they thought they were shaping us into better gymnasts, and that is the kind of hardcore coaching technique, but it literally felt like they were moulding us into these competitors, like physically and mentally moulding us. People that haven't experienced it will probably be thinking, like, why didn't you just leave? Like, why did you even stay? Or, you know, it's just a club. When you're in it quite deep, people do take it very seriously, and when you're dedicated to something like that, you can't just get up and leave. That's kind of not a question. And also at the time you don't think anything's wrong with it, you think that's just the norm. So it's not as easy as it sounds just to get up and leave. We literally didn't see any issue. If we didn't fit the mould, it would become apparent, let's just say that. Anyway, eventually I went into cheerleading because I had had enough. I wasn't in love with the sport anymore. It got too, I don't know, not too serious, but it got to the point where I wasn't enjoying it. The coaches were not good. My dad would literally have to force me to go, and then afterwards I would feel relief because I had been and it got over and done with. And that's when you know, like, it's just not right to stay in something like that. Gymnastics as well, you've got to dedicate your whole life to it. It's not just a sport, you know, you're in there Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, you're in there training. On holidays, you're in there all the time, and it's just a lot to commit to. It is a lot, and I don't feel like I was in love with it enough to carry on. So I went into cheerleading. I enjoyed my time at cheerleading. We did the Olympic torch relay, which I messed up. Looking back, I feel like telling these sorts of stories could help put it in perspective for people, and I hope this has helped or create awareness in some way. That level of mental and physical abuse is not okay. I encourage everybody to watch Athlete A. It's so eye-opening, upsetting, and just genuinely, I urge everyone to watch it because it really, really does put things in perspective. And yes, my story is not anywhere in comparison to other people's who have competed in higher teams in, you know, the Olympics, say, but I just wanted to give my take on it. And yeah, so I'm gonna leave it there. Yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed this video. If you have enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and a like. YouTube tells me that 60% of the people that watch me aren't subscribed, and that is a lot of percent. So if you haven't subscribed, please please do. I would really appreciate it. But yeah, thank you so much. I'll see you in my next video. Bye!